Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Dana Johnson, Chair of English, and I'm so pleased to welcome you tonight to the Shabir and Malini Chowdhury Foundation Distinguished Speaker Series. Yes. Through their foundation, the Chowdhurys have brought to USC both their significant Chowdhury Prize in Literature and this remarkable event tonight, a conversation with Claire Dederer, one of the most profound and significant writers of our time. For the last 6 years, the Chowdhury Foundation has collaborated with USC to present important writers such as Michael Ondaatje, Zadie Smith, Natasha Trethewey, Maxine Hong Kingston, and Harry Kunzru. On behalf of the university and the Department of English, please join me in appreciating Shabir and Malini Chowdhury's vision for this series and in thanking them for their generosity. Thank you. And now, I'd like to introduce my extraordinary colleague, David Ulin, the administrator of the Chowdhury Prize in Literature. He is the author or editor of 20 books, including the novel 13 Question Method, Sidewalking, Coming to Terms with Los Angeles, which was shortlisted for the PEN Diamonstein Spiel-Vogel Award for the art essay, and Writing Los Angeles, a literary anthology, which won a California Book Award. The former book editor and book critic of the Los Angeles Times, he has written for the Atlantic Monthly, Harper's, the Paris Review, and the New York Times, among others. He also received fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the Lannon Foundation, and most recently he edited Didion, the 1960s and 70s, and Didion, the 1980s and 90s, for the Library of America. Please welcome David Ulin, who will introduce our prize winner, Claire Dederer, and our incomparable colleague, Maggie Nelson. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. And thank you all for being here. So good evening and welcome to the 4th annual presentation of the Chowdhury Prize in Literature. It's a thrill to present this prize to a writer who is, as we like to say, at an inflection point with a body of work completed, but also a body of work yet to come. This is a key place for any artist to be, and it is a privilege to be able to support in some way these future explorations while also honoring the writing that also exists. I'd also like to begin by thanking the individuals and organizations who have made this evening possible. Shabir and Malini Chowdhury and the Shabir and Malini Chowdhury Foundation, Dean James Bullock and the USC Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, and Chair Dana Johnson and the Department of English. I'd also like to thank my fellow judges, Maggie Nelson, who you will be seeing in a minute, and Claudia Rankin. Let's please take a moment to acknowledge them. In many ways, Claire Dederer is the ideal recipient of the Chowdhury Prize. She's the author of 3 works of nonfiction and a writer who takes nothing for granted, least of all her own point of view. Her 2010 memoir, Poser, My Life in 23 Yoga Poses, uses a series of asanas to frame an inquiry into family and parenthood. Her 2017 follow-up, Love and Trouble, A Midlife Reckoning, seeks to disrupt the earlier book's sense of unity, its formal structure, in favor of a loose sequence of memory and reflection that together read like a succession of connected essays in forms both traditional and appropriated, including the case study and the abecedarium. The idea, Claire once observed, was to push back against the expectations of the genre, not least the idea that a memoir should lead to some sort of epiphany or prescription. I was trying very hard, she explained, to write a book that would articulate hard-to-tell situations without resolving them too neatly. Such an intention sits at the center of her 2023 exegesis Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma, a New York Times notable book of the year that grew out of a widely discussed 2017 essay in the Paris Review. There, Claire addresses the question of what we do with the art created by monstrous figures, among them Roman Polanski, Pablo Picasso, Woody Allen. The only possibility, she concludes, in a stunning act of reckoning and reconciliation is to acknowledge that the work is stained and then to approach it on our own terms. That this is open-ended is entirely the point, for what else do we have as humans but our own uncertainty? This is the requirement of art, of literature, to acknowledge what we don't know as much as what we do, to carve a trail through the thickets of our experience and our beliefs. Such a trail can only lead, as it does in the case of Monsters, to a more unsettled, complicated sense of responsibility. If we have no choice but to approach art through our own subjectivity, then we too must be complicit in some elusive fashion. It is a complex and deeply moving argument. Here we have writing that frames art not through the lens of hype or commerce, but rather through that of conversation and inquiry. And conversation is what this evening is about in the most fundamental sense, the conversation between artist and audience. That is what we have come together here for, to express our shared celebration of and support for a writer and her body of work. It is a pleasure to be able to showcase that in a culture increasingly brutish and isolating. Art opens us up. Can we just say that? It connects us at the core level of the soul. Claire understands this and the complications it provokes, which are the necessary and irresolvable complications of our humanity. In just a moment, Claire will settle in with my esteemed colleague in the English department, Maggie Nelson, for another kind of conversation about her astonishing body of work. But first, join me, please, in honoring Claire Dederer as the recipient of the 2025 Chowdhury Prize in Literature. My pleasure.
We'll give a little hug. Thank you. Hi. Thank you, David, and thank you all for being here. I'm very happy to see you beyond these lights. I am honored to accept the 2025 Chowdhury Prize in Literature. I'm deeply grateful to the USC Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, and to the Chowdhury Foundation, as well as the lovely Chowdhury family. As for the judges, David Yulin, Maggie Nelson, Claudia Rankin, I am truly awed that three such extraordinary writers spent any time at all with my work. Time is something we are all short on. The shortness of time is, in fact, what I want to talk about in my brief comments tonight. We seem not to have a lot of time left. I'm thinking about the wildfire smoke that fills the sky most summers in the Pacific Northwest. I'm thinking about the fires here in Los Angeles last winter. In the face of those fires and all the other fires, why write? My writing encompasses essay, memoir, and cultural criticism. It's the last of these that gets closest to my actual work, which is stubbornly hybrid in nature. I have to ask, is something as awkward and ephemeral sounding as cultural criticism any kind of way to face a world that is burning? And what is it that a critic does anyway? I find an answer to that question in the Greek root of the word critic, krai, which means to sieve. Well, yes, I am forever putting the world through a sieve, sifting. When I write, even if I'm building a story or unspooling a narrative, what I am really doing is thinking and making my own thinking visible to myself and then to the reader, sifting for truth. The folk singer Pete Seeger told an interviewer that his father had a saying about the truth. His father said, "The truth is a rabbit in a bramble patch, and you can't lay your hand on it. All you can do is circle around and point and say, it's in there somewhere," which is a very folk singery way to look at the truth. When I write, I am circling the bramble patch. The circling itself is part of the truth. The drama of not knowing the truth, of essaying, of circling is what I want to get on the page. I want to show my mind being changed. To me, that's as important, maybe more important, than the occasional glimpse of truth. I don't trust a writer who leaps to pronouncements and conclusions. I don't trust myself when I do the same. Only rarely in this life does a real rabbit simply come hurtling out of the brambles. We have learned the dangers of too easy truths over these past years. The spectacle of a critic slowly, carefully arriving at her judgment, or not arriving, this is one of the greatest loneliness mitigators I experience as a reader and therefore as a person. When the critic allows me, ushers me into her thinking, I trust her, I believe her, I am less alone, I become the thinker of her thoughts, and it's a relief. But what I want from her and from myself is more than that. The real truth, the whole truth, requires something that is both humbler and more ambitious. It requires an understanding that our feelings and our thoughts are not just our own. They are expressions of cultural, material, and historical forces far beyond our own experience. The best critics understand this. What feeling do you have that is not tied up with history? The late writer Randall Keenan asked this question at a 2019 talk at the University of Mississippi, and it's a line I think about almost every time I sit down to write. Our feelings and our judgments they feel sovereign, but they're tethered to our moment and our circumstance and to the moments and past circumstances that came before. The best autobiographical prose is neither transcendent nor universal, but it does ask its author to extend her understanding of her life, her feelings, her thoughts, past the confines of her own stories. To repeat, feelings which look immutable, personal, original, are made by history, by culture, by material conditions. Some people are able to express these kinds of connections in fiction or in poetry. For me and for so many of the writers I love, this dynamic is made most legible, most urgent in what we call, for lack of a better term, critical writing. I want to tell you a very short story before I finish up. In the summer of 2020, the West was choked with wildfire smoke. That August, a friend and I were sitting on the porch, which, as you may recall, was the way you saw your friends in the summer of 2020. We were discussing our children, young adults who were growing increasingly politically radical. My friend said brusquely, "They'll grow out of it. Every generation thinks it's facing the end of the world." I had said this very same thing myself many times, but now I looked at the pink-orange sky scrimmed by ash. Wasn't this different? I said, "This time it's really happening, though." And I found that I believed it. My belief had changed, my thinking had changed. It was my job to stay with what unfortunately appeared to be a new truth, to not give up even though this new truth was deeply unpleasant, and in fact, in certain ways, I myself was responsible for this unpleasant new truth. I'm hugely grateful to my kids and to other young people in my life for helping me look at the truth. It's my job to understand reality as it changes and to understand my role. That's what criticism really is. It's my job to sift the truth, to circle the bramble patch. In this burning world, I need the writers I love to think hard and allow me to witness the spectacle of their thinking, and I will try my best to do the same. Thank you so much. Oh. And now we have the one and only, the great Maggie Nelson. Hi.
That was so great, Claire.
Oh,
Thank you.
thanks.
Hi, everybody. How are you doing? Hi, Sophia. Hi, great. Fantastic, great. I'm so glad that you said all that because my first question was about truth, so now I'll just wipe that off my list. So,
Okay,
check. Yeah, check, exactly. Although I still have some questions about that. But anyway, it's great to see you guys all out. We're going to talk for a little while, and then we'll take some questions from you if you have them, so you can be thinking about that. And then after that, Claire will sign books out in the lobby and whatnot. So, but yeah, I have a lot of in-the-weeds questions for you, and I'm so excited to get to talk to you. But before we go do that, because I feel like I've been accused of starting in the weeds, I thought, I'm sure a lot of people know your work here, and some people may know less, but I was struck when you were just describing yourself. What did you say, like stubbornly hybrid?
Yeah.
And you were also highlighting, I think you said something about like of the things that cultural criticism, I can't remember what you said, but it was like maybe where you...
I think it's the best descriptor for what I do.
Yes, exactly. So I was just wondering if you might be willing to give a brief for my benefit as well, just kind of a brief précis of the journey from starting writing criticism in journalism and different things to the 3 works that are stubbornly hybrid, but with different attitudes towards their inclusion of autobiography,
Yeah, I think that understanding of hybridity and the work of cultural criticism is something that I sort of revealed myself to myself as I went. It took me a long time to figure out what my real work was, and I think I was working it out in certainly the first book and maybe well into the second book. So I started out as a film critic. And so I wrote criticism for a long time, and that was my job. And I found it, really baffling. I was just sort of the whole concept of the review as this,
right?
The way that you had to retail your opinion was just utterly baffling to me. I was supposed to tell people what to think, just seemed crazy. And so from the start, when I was in my 20s as a film critic, I was drawn toward getting on the page the drama of coming to a critical conclusion. So that was always interesting to me, and bringing life into the criticism was really important, and I think that's informed everything I've done. So I went from there to start, then I had kids, and it was easier to be a book critic.
Right.
And so I started to write a lot of book criticism, and in a way that's more of a blood sport than film criticism, because you can really affect someone's reality with a book review, right? In a way that a film review, it's just, it's a sort of larger entity that's
Plus,
affected.
like, you're a writer and you're writing about writers, so you're in a blood sport with other writers.
Yes, exactly. And it's just, the one person. So that was, and for a time, I think I was a bit of a hatchet man. And then I became, once again, kind of caught up in the idea of, like, no, I can just focus on how I come to these conclusions. And then I noticed I was interested more and more in telling stories. And I was also really, a thing that's kind of, this is a long answer.
No, I like it. It's great.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm learning too, because I've read a lot of your reviews, and Claire has a great website where a lot of your work is listed, and I think I became very interested in the relationship between all of these reviews and the longer books. So I'm glad to be getting a little bit of this story. Okay.
So a thing that's kind of subterranean in my work that it took me a long time to bring forward and kind of starts to really come out in Monsters is that I'm a younger sibling, so I have like a very animated sense of fairness, and I'm really motivated by a polemical urge. Like, I have a lot of ideas about how things should be. And even though my first book, Poser, appears to be kind of a book about a yoga mom, it's also about the kind of depoliticization of the American family, the turning of all of the energy around what it is to be good or what it is to be a citizen, and expressing all of that within the home or within the body. So that was sort of what animated the book, and I didn't know that you could be as hybrid as I wanted to be. So I was sort of taking that, it was almost like a Trojan horse, where I was taking that and putting it inside this pretty cozy memoir, which I love. I mean, I love an intimate domestic memoir, so that's not a problem. But I wasn't quite in the space where I realized that I could both be a person, a domestic person, a feeling person, a physical person, and be a very overtly thinking person on the page. And so I started to work that out formally in my second book, Love and Trouble. I started to use formal play to express some more of these like polemical ideas that were animating that book, that had to do with kind of having grown up as a predated teen in the 1970s, and the long stinging tale of how that affected my own sexuality into my adulthood, right? So I was starting to grasp toward this idea that personal story could sit side by side with thinking, and then I wrote Monsters, which kind of then inverts the kind of balance of those two things.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. No, it's great. And I think I'm curious to hear you say a little bit more about your polemical urge, because I think that there's something, I'm looking for this quote in here, but like, you have a way in your writing of like a lot of people who want to present a paradox, they might try and do it by equivocating or like kind of this side, that side, or different things. But like you do really maintain a strong opinionated, like a feeling of the strong polemic, while you also, and I would say this is like very characteristic of a lot of your writing, you're really letting two often very opposite things be true, like a kind of a true dialectic at the same time. But you're not like, anyway, I can pull up some examples, but I wonder if you just might want to speak to that a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
wait. So this idea of the ability to hold these kind of two ideas at the same time.
I mean, maybe it might help.
Maintain oneself.
Yeah, I mean, it might help if I maybe give the audience like some examples. I mean, I guess one thing I'm really thinking that you do, and this is kind of has a feminist dimension as well, but you're really good at, I'm thinking about this great piece that you wrote about emotional labor and kind of being the person who you say, like, after all these presumptions of going into like a marriage with the idea of egalitarian labor, you say somehow it ended up that it was I who harbored the babysitter's phone number, I who remembered the shoe sizes, I who kept track of allergies. Better to have all that information reside in one place, the place called mother. And then you say, the more caregiver relationships I managed, the more details about drop-offs and pickups and appointments I kept filed in my head, the more I found myself the sole toiler in the field we've come to call emotional labor. But like as you're describing in this situation, like you're registering the injustice and like the gendered injustice of becoming the person who's the holder, of all of the emotional like labor, certain kinds of domestic labor, and at the same time, you are not really stopping there in this kind of cri de coeur of like what a bummer it is, but you're also inviting us, and this is the part where I think there's like this really more interesting feminism that emerges in your work, which is to also be like, it's not that we're responsible for all of like living in these vestigial situations or very active situations, but we are responsible to them in some way. Like, what are you going to do? Besides just like unspooling the resentment and the rage, like what's your part in it, and like what are you going to do? And I think in Love and Trouble, and we can get into what you just said about this relationship, like you do the same thing with like the predated, which is not predated, like before.
Yeah, it's not like
it means like
earlier.
Being like
Preyed upon.
Preyed upon.
Yeah, there you go.
Preyed like mixed with being like sexually desirous and precocious and different things without, like while trying to balance by asking throughout what's the relationship between these two things without ever deciding like this was a trauma, thus I've become who I am and here's this pathological behavior that stems from it, but nor saying this had absolutely nothing to do with it and everything that happened is perfectly fine and I will seal, so like, but you're really able to present and hold these two kinds of making sense to you.
Yeah. I think that's what you're saying. There's often these two impulses that are working together, and I think that in some ways, some of that balance, what turns into like a dialectic that will unspool over the course of a book, is just this sort of impulse I have to always be on to myself, to always be the one who's in the position of responsibility. There's a kind of centering of myself that's almost compulsive in the book. And I think that's part of where it comes from. I think it's also, like, a different way to think about it is that all of my writing that is any length at all is preoccupied with this problem of goodness. What does it mean to be good? Am I good? Am I good enough? Is this person good? It's very got this kind of moral questioning that keeps haunting this poor narrator. She can't stop thinking about it kind of over the course of these 3 books. I think that the polemical part, maybe polemical is the wrong word even. Maybe it is more dialectical. Maybe it is rotating around this question of goodness. But I do think often in my work, I end up with a polemical question at the end, which is what now? Right. The book, the writing often moves from a kind of a movement. This is so pretentious. Theory into praxis, right?
Right,
Like, what
yeah,
are you going to do?
Right.
What now?
Yeah.
What is to be done?
Yeah.
And that's like a polemic question, right?
Yeah. I mean, I love that because for those of you who've read Monsters, like, you really stage it as like the first question is a kind of like, well, what are we to do? Like the same thing, a kind of praxis, like what are we to do with the work by so-called monsters? But then you really, you waste no time in kaleidoscoping, saying, kind of like, this is not the right question,
Yes.
because that's as you say, a kind of consumer question, like, either like thumbs up or thumbs down it, or buy it, don't buy it. But is that really the question? And the question, by the end of the book, I don't want to be like a deep spoiler. I won't do a deep spoiler, but, well, I'll spoil like a little bit, which is just to say the question has more to do, I think, with, kind of what David, you were saying before about this kind of spectacularly empathetic turn to like, what do we do about, love and loving, whether work or people who do terrible things, which, as your book makes, abundantly clear, like, it is a grave ethical mistake to exclude ourselves from that category,
Yeah, I think that the book ultimately, we were talking about this in class today, the book ultimately wants to, okay, let's say that there is this dialectic or this kind of tension between two things, and on the one hand you have the consumption of you have the terrible thing the person did, and on the other side you have the so-called greatness of the work, which is its own problem, deciding that something's great. And I think that the first thing I did was take that idea of greatness and translate it into a more subjective and a more meaningful and a more vital idea, which is the idea of love, right? So the question often gets kind of posited as, well, is this work so important that we'll forgive this rotten thing this person did? And, okay, let's just stop. Like, who is deciding what's important?
Yeah.
It's that's like a really dangerous way to judge anything from art to people.
Yeah.
So then we have to let the decision and the sovereignty of the decision reside in us, right? And it's just about your subjective experience of love and learning to recognize that, to, when you're looking at the balance between the badness of the act and the love you have for the work, that's what you're balancing. And then after that, I felt, so I had to change the terms. Does that make sense? And then I just really felt that to start with as a corrective to the way that this conversation was happening more generally, it was really important for me to be a voice for this idea of love of the work, which is an incredibly tender, weird, cheesy thing to talk about. To say I'm a voice for love, I mean, yikes.
Yeah, but it's so important because when you get into this, again, I'm just spoiling. Whatever. You'll all read the book because it's great. But I feel like at the end is you kind of have a conversation with a character named Scott who you're talking about, an actual real life person, and saying, and he said, like, I think his stepfather who's done some terrible things, and he says, I love him still, like, even after everything. But it's an interesting moment when you are, I don't know, like all the fourth walls have kind of fallen, and now we're fully in a conversation about life, life and this notion of like, not just I love him anyway, like the stain is gone, but just how do we sit with that? And also, I will also say that you make really interesting use throughout the book, like beginning with Polanski, but there's like actually, no, maybe I think I'm moving things around. Oh, that's from Love and Trouble. I'm back, but I think like you do have moments, I guess, I'll just say in other of your books where you actually describe, like you're kind of using Repulsion, the movie, to kind of frame, understand, get through like an assault on the street, like by thinking about the film. And so it's really interesting to put the books, actually that maybe segues into something I want to talk about, which is the relationship between these two books. But we've already seen you using this work to live in a certain way.
Right, yeah. And that's a great example. So I'm on my way to see this Polanski film, Repulsion, which is about Catherine Deneuve is like left alone in Paris on her own. And she keeps getting kind of groped on the street, And then she's in her sister's apartment, and she starts kind of slowly losing her mind. And there's all these fantastical, surrealist scenes of like eyeballs and arms trying to grab her. And I was kind of living through, I wasn't going through such a cinematic mental
cinematic,
breakdown, and I
yeah.
certainly did not look like Catherine
Yeah.
Deneuve or have as good a wardrobe. But I had been left alone in a strange city by myself, and it had also been groped on the street. And so seeing this spectacle of her going through this was a way to translate my own experience back to myself, and there was this quality of love, because I do love that film, and yet it's about something rotten that also happened to me. Yeah.
This is kind of a weird question because I don't really know where I'm going with it. But I was really interested just because I just read these two books back to back, and I was interested to hearing you speak at all about how maybe monsters might have come out of Love and Trouble. And I noticed it was very strong that like Love and Trouble, which has to do with Claire writing a lot more about, again, like childhood and early adulthood sexuality. Not sexuality is the wrong word, like sexual. I don't know, like,
You like want a different word, but you don't know what it is. It's not. It's. Yeah.
I know, sexual expression or
Sexualness.
experience. Yeah, sexual. But at the very start of Love and Trouble, you have this story about being in a flirtation with this kind of, he's not a boy, he's a man, but like a kind of bad boy in like literature that like you meet at a party, but you talk about that the attraction to the immoral person who makes things happen, and you say, I confess, his sinning was what interested me. And then I also noticed in the opening chapter, you call your earlier self a disastrous pirate slut of a girl, a clueless bitch, and that horrible girl. And I guess it wasn't so much like I was like, oh, wow, harsh. It was more like reading them back to back and then reading these. I was really struck by the kind of move that you eventually make in Monsters of a kind of self, not just yourself, but just like, I guess I would just say about women, an inventory of different ways in which women are not like excluded from the human race or the human saga of being able to potentially cause harm to other people.
Right,
but that you begin, it's interesting to me that like reading them back to back, that you begin Love and Trouble with this kind of very characterization of literally of like calling yourself yourself a horrible all these things, and then also saying like you're attracted to the sinning. And I was just curious, like, how these things, like, did they feel like they were running into, like, moving from one from the other?
Yeah, I think if you are, for me,
Yep.
and so I won't say if you are, but
Yep.
for me as a writer who was deeply preoccupied with these ideas about goodness
Yep.
and what it is to be good, there was a sense that I had to then partition away or compartmentalize the part of me that was not good. If there is
Right.
goodness, there is badness. I mean,
Right.
if you're going to create these moral dichotomies,
Right.
then they're both going to be there.
Right.
And so this is a woman at the opening of Love and Trouble who has been trying so hard to be good that she had to cut off all of the part of her
Right,
that was
right,
bad.
right, right.
So she's not actually really a full human, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of that book is asking why that's the case.
Yeah.
Why is she clinging so
Yeah.
hard to this idea of goodness?
Yeah.
Why does she have to cast the bad self so far in the darkness? And I think that character a lot more, by the end of the book, is almost like valorizing the darkness. That's the process of that book. And I think that Monsters has this movement. I think that I and the book had a movement toward really reckoning with the idea that is universal. Everybody has some quality of darkness or monstrosity, and we must love them. And therefore, I must be loved, right? I mean, this is all sound really, it doesn't read this therapeutic. Somehow Maggie's gotten at this, but.
You're blaming me. No, I hear you. No, I think, well, there's a lot of things. I mean, one, maybe this is a good segue into talking a little bit about like some of the writing that you've done about mothering, which is both in both in both of these two books, and then also in a lot of reviews and things that you've done too. But I mean, one of my very favorite, and this is an indication when you say it doesn't sound this like touchy-feely, and that like this is, I'm just paraphrasing, but you can still get the amazing punchy quality of Claire's prose. But you have this great line where in Monsters where you're saying like, I'm staying up at night wondering like if I've been a good mother and if I've done damage to my kids, you know, like it keeps me up. And then I think, and then there's Picasso just putting out cigarettes on his girlfriend's face.
Right,
you know what I mean?
right.
Like, and this kind of just like, it's really bracing. Like that's kind of the quality of the prose, like I'm saying, is very bracing. But I think, you know, it reminded me of a joke I always heard, like when I was dropping kids off at daycare, where they would say like, oh, the mothers always drive away like feeling so guilty, and the dads always drive away feeling so proud that they dropped their kid off at daycare. Yeah. And I was like, that really ain't it the way. But I was really, anyway, there's a lot of, you make this, you know, I think provocative and I think mostly correct proposition in Monsters that you're kind of asking yourself if the kind of cardinal stereotype or sin for the male monster is rape, you know, what is it for and these are, you know, these are just stereotypes and, you know, they're not whatever they're like, but for the woman it would be like to be like a mother who abandons their child. And so you have this chapter, is it just called Abandoning
Mothers.
Abandoning Mothers, right, yeah. And, you know, really reminded me of, I don't know, did you read that Jacqueline Rose book, Mothers, on an essay on love and cruelty? I don't know. It's really great. But like her thesis in that book is basically like, by choosing a category like mother to put like all ethical goodness or care and nurture into, and then that there's actually like the flip side of that coin is like sadism, because like mothers can't keep their children from suffering, and they especially can't keep their children from suffering structural injustices of the world of which they are not responsible and sole parties, but that it's much easier to activate you know, the sadism at the mother for not being able to stop what, you know, the Buddhists would call the you know, first noble truth, which is that we suffer, right?
Right.
But there's all this punishment that goes with this fear, you know. So I feel like you really do this amazing job in that chapter of like puncturing holes as well as giving, you know, shining a light on this unfairness while also, you know, making, but by not, like you've, like, say, well, we can talk maybe a little bit about Joni Mitchell, but not, how am I trying to say? Like, the quick move would be like to valorize the asshole, you know, like she's such an asshole, and like she's such an asshole, she gave her child up to make great art, but isn't that cool, you know? And it's not,
right,
you don't go,
badass.
you don't, yeah, it's not badass, but you're like not going there either, you know, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, just to back up a little bit, I feel like I think that everything you just said underscores the not quite human status of the mother, which is interesting. It kind of mirrors the genius, right? It's something that's outside the experience of what is human. Because we really spend a lot of time talking about whether or not mothers are good mothers or bad mothers, and maybe that talking just goes on inside of us. It certainly does inside of me. And that's not really how we categorize people in general. Like if I talk about someone I've met, I'm not like, oh, he's a good person or a bad person. It's just, I liked him, I didn't like him, he spelled funny or whatever.
But the mother's not a person.
The mother is caught in this goodness, badness thing. So I do think that there's this really interesting, like the mother as the site of judgment, which you're describing as this quality of sadism, I think is, it's an unusual status. Children get this status, right? Children are judged.
Center evil,
They're judged as good or bad. So it's in a way, it's making the mother all important, but it's also infantilizing her. So I do think mothers have this special status, and I can't remember the second part of the question.
Yeah, that's okay. It's okay. I mean, it makes me. I'm really glad that you said that.
Mitchell.
What you said about. Oh yeah, Joni Mitchell. I'm gonna get to her, but like, I feel like you. Well, you have this moment in that chapter where you have all this white space around this one line, which just stands alone in white space, and you say, "We mustn't punish mothers for going to work, comma, even in our minds." And I just. It's really an unusual moment in the book. I don't think there's any other sentence that just stands there like that. I don't know. I wondered if you wanted to say anything more about.
I don't know. I feel like I don't mean to be coy, but
No, I like it. I like it as leaving it be.
Yeah, I think to me, I think the white space around it, there's this quality when you are employing white space that you're really inviting the reader to make meaning.
Yeah.
And because that's such a powerful idea for me, and because I both feel so punished and have punished myself so much, and allowing the reader a little bit of space to fill that in however they want was what was important. And it's kind of one of those invitations to allow the reader to be in their own subjective experience of what I'm saying.
No, I get that.
I can't believe I'm talking to Maggie.
Give me a break.
About white
No,
space.
give me a break. No, sorry. Give me a break. Give me a break. I don't care about white space. Okay. Okay, but I do want to talk about the Joni Mitchell thing for just 1 minute, because I've been obsessed with this story and this quote for a long time myself, so it was really delicious to hear you read it out. I don't know if you're willing to, like, I feel like I hate being interviewed. They're like, will you tell the story? But do you mind quickly just telling the story about Chris Christopherson and the Brandi Carlile thing?
Yeah, I don't know if I can remember.
Okay, I can just tell it because I just read it. But
yeah, I'm not sure I can remember it exactly.
Okay, well, it was just that, like, Joni Mitchell had told this story about Chris Christopherson saying to her when Blue came out something like, gosh, Joni, like, don't you think you should save anything for yourself? Like, don't you think you should, like, I don't know, protect this, like, you're being too vulnerable, is like to this.
Yeah, he's all the men. When she put out Blue, she was very entrenched in this LA singer-songwriter scene. And from her telling and from the way her biographers have written about it, all the men, like, freaked out because this album was so vulnerable. And I think one of the ways that they sort of put the thumb on her was to tell her they were worried that she'd been too vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. And then just like, so she'd said that in her, I don't know, autobiography or whatever. She told this story, or the story had been known. And then much later, when you guys may have seen, when Brandi Carlile brought an aged Joni Mitchell out at, what was the Grammys or something?
It was American Masters.
Okay, yeah. So, but when she introduced her, she said, I just want to thank you, Joni, like, she told this story, then she said, well, let's all thank Joni, for not saving anything for yourself.
Even better, she came out and did a number with Chris Christopherson, and he was kind of doddering.
Right.
And she sort of takes him by the hand and says, thank you for not keeping anything for yourself, Joni.
Right.
And then she kind of leads Chris Christopherson off.
Like, away. I mean, okay, there's a lot about this story that is interesting to me. I guess, as a kind of segue into this question about vulnerability, which is a word I just kind of...
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's just like PTSD, like you just get like, if you're described a lot that way, you just start to like have some weird reaction to the word. But notably in this story, which I think is the most interesting part about it, Joni Mitchell does not ever weigh in on whether she's giving it all away or not.
Right.
Chris Christopherson says she is. Brandi says, thank you for not. She does not weigh in on this question. And I think that, I guess why it's interesting to me is like, when people, when I feel like every Q&A I ever do, there's always a question of like, is there anything you didn't say in this book? And I'm like, what do you think? It's like, 10,000 words. Like there's a lot more I could have said. And I think this kind of weird feeling that that everything you thought or felt is contained within the book, or worse, when people ask, like, is there anything you didn't say? You're like, well, if there were, like, I wouldn't tell you right now. Like, we're not going to, this isn't the moment for it to come out, So and yet we both know that, of course, there's some degree of, like, what you were describing before about thinking out loud. Like, there has to be a lot of freedom in the process, which is a lot of not thinking about. Like you can't go all the way through a thought or all the way through an experience without letting yourself, somewhere unspool the whole thing without worrying about holding anything back or not holding anything back. So I'm just curious how that process goes.
Yeah, I feel like this is also something we were talking about in class today. The class people are nodding and waving at me. I think, yes, when I was talking earlier just now about this quality of making thinking or feeling or whatever legible to the reader, and sharing that process of moving through what you call the dialectic, right? So you're going back and forth, you're thinking about this problem of what do we do with the art of monstrous men, or whatever it is you're thinking about, and you're making that scrutable, right? that makes it sound as though I sit down and
Right.
I do that thinking on the page, and then I'm like, yes, the end,
Right.
fin.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that is not, one of the things that was so, I mean, I've been a critic a long time, so
Yeah.
I knew this to be true in the short form.
Yeah.
But and this is something certainly that you have done many times, but this problem of making the thinking almost the protagonist
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
book
yeah.
takes a lot of shaping.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's quite unnerving
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
this, to
Yeah.
foreground the thinking
Yeah.
in this way,
Yeah.
and to just trust that the reader will
Yeah.
come with it. So
Yeah.
the fact is that it sounds free,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
certainly there's a lot of freedom when I'm thinking my way through the problem,
Yeah.
but it's just like any other kind of writing. It's just like when you write something that's allegedly vulnerable, right? It is not. It is
Right.
something that has been shaped and
Yeah,
worked
yeah,
in.
yeah.
What was it's what you said something earlier tonight about things being crusted by art or something.
Encrusted, I don't know, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
doing.
yeah.
You're
Yeah,
crusting
yeah,
it with
yeah,
art,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. One of my very favorite, and what you're describing about making the thinking a protagonist, or what I keep thinking of is this feeling that when, like, the way that you do it is not just making the thinking the protagonist, but often you'll even bring the book-making process into it. And I think one of my very favorite moments of this, and I remember when I taught Monsters, we talked about this for a long time because it was so, for total lack of a better word, ballsy. But you have this, well, I'll back up a little bit and say, in a review of somebody else's book, you said, rarely do contemporary writers allow themselves to speak so freely about their careers. More commonly, we see a lot of disaffection about the idea of ambition itself. Whereas in Monsters, to deal with this notion of the myth of the genius or of greatness, you really go full throttle into a conversation about the desire for greatness, or the desire, the ambitiousness that we all have in our work. And I just wanted to, it's one of my favorite moments in Monsters is when you describe like two conversations, one telling a therapist.
I knew you were going to say that.
I know, because it's so good. Like the therapist, like you tell about your ambition to write a great book, and the therapist is like, kind of pathologizing it, like, why do you think you have these aspirations, and where do you think these feelings come from? And then you tell a friend who's...
But he says, I say, I want to write a great book. And he says, where's that coming from?
Exactly.
And I say, because I want my book to be great.
Exactly.
What's that about?
I know.
The ambition can never just be the ambition.
Right.
It has to be this sickness.
Right. And then you tell a friend who's also an artist, a writer, or
writer.
And they say, kind of blasé, like, "Welcome to the Thunderdome," like we're all here to try and make great work. Like, what are you doing? And you say you felt very like calmed and at home. And I laugh because I've thought about that line, "Welcome to the Thunderdome." Like I think about it all the time. I think it's super. I think it's just super funny, and I also think it's But here's the thing, though. When I say the ballsy part is like when you talk about wanting to write a great book in the middle of a book.
As I'm writing a book.
As you're writing a book, and being like, trying to be like, what's genius, what's not genius, of course it's going to, like, that you're also inviting the reader to be like, is this a great book? Like, and the thing is, Monsters is a great book, and yet it's not, it's very difficult to, or just unusual to accomplish that form, like its own unique form of greatness, that's one in which these are the kind of conversations that you have in it. And I wondered, was that like nerve-wracking for you?
Yeah. I mean, there wasn't any part of this book that was not nerve-wracking to write. So moments like that, which have a certain bravura, and I know that. Like, I'm not going to pretend I don't. I knew what I was doing. I'm not.
Right, you're no rube.
I'm not a
You're in the
rube. I didn't just
Thunderdome,
fall
Claire.
off a turnip truck. But I wrote this book over the period from, I think I started it in 2015 before Love and Trouble came out.
Yeah.
And I finished it in 2023. Just taking a moment to feel kind of sad about that. But over that period, everything changed in the sense of how we navigated judgment of one another, on social media, which is, of course, one of the topics of the book, right? But so many people, I'm 58, and so many people my age became blocked during this period and stopped writing and tried to blame it on woke culture or whatever.
Right.
But mostly what they were experiencing was the inability to know how to process the judgment of the internet. Like that just was something that people could not handle, including me. You know, and it's part of what I'm trying to tackle in this book. How do we separate ourselves from these dynamics? But that is the thing that's most meta about this book, is that I was going through that as a writer, because there is this thing, I'm sure you all have seen it, students especially, when you look at people who are older than you, this fear of the internet. You know, I have a friend who sometimes used to say to me in like 2017, I'm gonna go on Twitter and cancel you. You know, there's just sort of this weird hall of mirrors about it, and it's just, it was just it's lost energy. It was a waste of time. It was a stupid thing to be concerned with, but it was our stupid thing to be concerned with in this period. And so writing this book in that moment, that was a very real problem. And so everything about the book felt fraught. I had to, at every turn, not try to run every sentence past an imaginary committee. So the drive to say a truth was always hard. I mean, I'm not trying to, I don't know, exaggerate my heroic achievement in writing a book.
But the thing is, it is heroic in the sense that there's so many ways that, like, this book will outlast the moment of the kind of high cancel culture conversation, and I was rereading it thinking like, wow, like how or why, you know, and I don't actually quite know, I don't quite have the trick. I think part of it is, part of it's just your skill in, you know, moving towards the fire, you know, instead of away from it, and then part of it is this thing that, you know, you say in the beginning, you say, you know, we tell ourselves we're having ethical thoughts when we're really, what we're having are moral feelings. And it seems like instead of talking about like Twitter directly or social media, you know, you make this more philosophical, I think, distinction of kind of like moral feelings might be what's floating around on the internet, but the book is going to do ethical thinking, you know?
Yes, yeah. And I think that that's, you know, certainly a moral feeling is not something that was invented by the internet. Like anyone who's ever lived in a small community has experienced a moral feeling.
That harlot.
Or had a moral feeling aimed at them.
Yeah.
So it is something that has a longer, it's just a human way of being, to feel affronted, to feel righteously. I mean, a lot of it is just about pointing so that people don't look at what's back here. You know, it's it's such a very normal human thing to do. It just became kind of supersized.
And was your experience moving through it with all the conversations, because it spun up so many conversations. Your eyes are widening, so I don't know. Did the book itself is so sure-footed, and you as a talker are so, I feel like, sure-footed. Whereas it seems like a lot of these fears are almost like by design, trying to like make people feel like they're knocking around in like very strong winds and like can't get their bearings. Did that feeling of having your bearings about what you'd done and what you'd said, did it persist through all of the books, kind of all the different spheres in which it brought you into?
That's interesting. That's not everyone's reading of the book.
Okay.
I think a lot of people felt that the book, you know, had a kind of wobbly Buster Keaton, I'm going to go here and I'm going to go there, and sure-footedness was maybe, I mean, I felt sure-footed.
Yeah.
I think to me, there's nothing wobbly about making an assertion and then pointing at the assertion and saying, do I really think that? That's just interesting to me.
Yeah.
And it's just how the brain works. So I felt it was sure-footed.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Did I feel like, I don't know, I had this big benefit, which is that when I I published an essay on this topic in 2017.
Oh, right. So you'd had some time.
Yeah, and it was right when it was in October 2017, right after the Weinstein accusations were made public. And the essay, I had been writing on this subject for 2 years without, I mean, I knew a little bit about Tarana Burke, but I didn't know a lot about this idea of Me Too. And I just was interested, I was really just interested in Roman Polanski. That's all I was interested in.
Yeah.
How could I know so much about this horrible, horrible, horrible person and still love his films? That was the animating question. That was the whole thing. And so it was like this very personal thing. It was like a hobby, I think I write in the book.
Yeah.
And so I published this piece that I had been thinking about really deeply for 2 years, even though it was pretty short. And people, I think, it seemed like a hot take because it fell into the middle of this conversation.
Right.
But what they didn't see was the tale that was
Yeah.
2 years of thinking that was behind it. And people really, you know, some people hated it, some people didn't, whatever, people argued with it.
Yeah.
But the taking the time to really think about it was something that people responded really positively to.
Yeah.
And that was incredibly helpful. And the sure-footedness, I think, partly just came from having had that experience.
Yeah.
I had known that I could do what I do, which is kind of circle, think, rethink, and that people would want to do that with me.
Is your phone like alive, ringing with people wanting you to talk about Epstein?
No, I wish.
You wish, really?
Yeah.
Okay, now we were just talking
I have
backstage with
Epstein
whether or
thoughts.
not we were gonna, you do.
Yeah.
Are we gonna, maybe I pitched to you that in 2 minutes when we start the Q&A, somebody can ask a question about Epstein so we can get
I
to.
don't really have anything smart to say. You're much more, you have more new, even more than I do.
But that's just because I spent all day reading the news. But I don't, all right, what do I want to say? What do I want to ask you for my last question? I have so many questions and we didn't get to. I mean, I guess, oh God, so many things. I mean, I guess I would just ask you maybe this, like, so again, in a review of somebody else's work, you said, you know, this is true of every memoir. The current self, that is, the person writing the story, is different from the earlier self, the subject of the book. Part of a memoirist's style, and even her meaning, lies in how she decides to deal with this split. She can make the schism visible, or she can pretend it doesn't exist. And then you go on to kind of
So I
talk.
just to my own writing.
No, it's good. It's what we're here for, Claire. We're celebrating you and you're a genius, and so you can yours. Okay, but my question about this split, which I guess I've talked about with students in a lot of different ways, is kind of like the writing present, and then or like Virginia Woolf has this kind of beautiful, famous image of like being on top of the water in the present and then looking down in the water in the past, like the past. There's all these kind of different ways in which, but I agree with you that autobiographical writing is always a kind of trick, which you even get more into with this, in that even the person you create as the person writing, the writing present is no longer your present, because things happen that are exceeding the book's focus and you don't include them, and so every book kind of ends up the fiction of both the past that it's discussing and the current, the speaker of it. But it's also what makes it the art, right? Because eventually at the end of the day, it was spoken by someone at a particular temporal moment.
Right.
Anyway, I was just wondering if you had anything else to say, maybe in like things you've been writing since, or about new strategies about dealing with this schism that afflicts all autobiographical writing.
Well, a couple things. I really like that image of, we were talking earlier today about this, the trinity of the self in personal writing. So there's the character on the page, there's the narrator, and then there's this mysterious author presence.
Right.
And what you're really talking about is the author herself becoming an artifact. And I just like that image. I like the idea that she is also kind of trapped in this moment of being, and that feels very true to me.
Yeah.
And obviously we can only, speaking of Buddhists, we can only write what we know at the time, and then so I would say less about how I'm going to move forward in the future, but I think that after writing these books, I think I have more of a, I think when I was younger and when I was more of a beginning writer, when that author would become sort of out of fashion, when she'd become obscure. I would have kind of that self-rejecting anger at her. And
You mean like at the author?
at the self that I
you've
had been
created.
as the author of that book.
Yeah.
And now I see that as sort of, I don't know, it's like, can I stack those former authors up like cordwood, and how many more can I add? That seems like kind of a lucky thing to get to do to me.
And do you feel, I lied, this is my very last question, because I said I was going to ask you a question about truth to start, and then you happily preempted me with the brambles about truth. But
So folk singery.
yeah, but it was interesting because I've noticed in reading, like kind of preparing for tonight, that truth as a word, like I think part of why I was going to start with this, it comes up like a lot for you, and it's weird because I would like never, would never come up for me like in talking about nonfiction writing, and I wonder, like people often will ask me like, do you regret any of your books, or do you, and I'm always like, when you were just talking about kind of looking at them fondly stacking up, like do you feel,
Well, I mean fondly looking at sort of the dead selves.
the dead selves, yeah. But like, do you feel like part of that acceptance is that every book gets to its truths that it could get to at that living time, and that it's like there's not like, and even if you notice like, oh, now that sounds, or maybe I'd say it differently, it's not really a regret because it's like that's what that self could get to in this project, or do you burn up with things you wish you
No, I used to. It's interesting. My younger kid just wrote a long essay on naming and on, sort of people who change their names and how names can change. And she was reading this introduction to a collection of writing by Derrida. And in that collection, in the introduction to this collection of his writings, Derrida says something like, I didn't write any of these. I'm not the author of these. I am the person I am now. And my daughter asked me, are you the author of Poser? And I said, no, I'm not. And I think that that's fine. It was a really interesting question that it really made me understand something about the passage of selves, and that's, you don't have to disavow, you don't have to be embarrassed, you don't have to regret. It's just what being human is.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I love it. All right, you guys, now it's your turn, so you can ask some questions. And I think that...
If any.
think that maybe you have to take the long walk of
or you can just
difficulty, or you can just stand up and holler because we'll probably be able to hear you too. So,
Or Maggie can keep asking me questions.
I know. Well, I'm not done, so it's okay. But I'm not letting you guys off the hook because I really want to hear from you all and just hear what you're thinking about.
Teachers really know how to.
Okay. Yeah. Here you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do the readers need, or does the critic need?
I think that the readers need.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. What skills do Right. I think that the first skill the reader needs is the real curiosity. It's almost like the reader needs to come to the review or to the piece of writing more in a dynamic of conversation, rather than more of a passive receptivity of being told what to do. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm often I think when a lot of people begin reading, especially kind of bossy or opinionated writing, they feel pushed around or like interpolated and kind of and it kind of produces like a mad feeling, like, well, is this person, acting like they know what's what, and like it's a kind of like I think it's like a phase where if you end up coming to it in conversation, which has to do with like believing in yourself as a conversation partner, not just as like a receptacle for other people's
Giving
information.
yourself a little credit.
Then you don't have to maybe be, you can be in conversation with some really opinionated writing, not in the same like subjugation's not an option, I guess, I would just say. Like,
Yeah.
so it helps, you know.
Yeah, I think that that's right.
But why am I talking?
But I think it's, I think reviews and critical writing tend to do kind of two different things. One does the thing I'm talking about, which is like the walking around and looking. And then there's the kind of critic who makes pronouncements. This is the best book ever, or this is the, and to me, I am not deeply into, that's kind of an athletic kind of criticism that's going to sort of trounce the book or lift it up or whatever. And I'm not deeply interested in that, and I don't know how the reader should come to that work, except in the most traditional way, which is to, and I don't think people read criticism like this anymore, which is to find a critic with whom you agree over 60% of the time, and then believe all their pronouncements. But people don't read criticism that way anymore. They used to when there were daily newspaper critics, but they don't anymore. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
No, it's good. Go ahead.
You're good.
You mentioned that you weren't the same person anymore after, or the same author after writing Monsters or Love and Trouble. Do you find yourself mourning the loss of that author, or looking forward to who you will be writing your next book of who you are right now in this limbo state?
Yeah. So if you're a different writer than you were when you wrote the previous book, do you mourn that self, or are you looking forward to the next one? I feel like the one thing I know that since I started writing books or started writing anything for publication was I'm like a shark. All I ever want to do is keep going and do the next thing. So success as a writer doesn't really mean how somebody interpreted my work or even how the book sold. To me, success as a writer means getting to do the next thing. And so for me, it's always about moving on to that next self, which is, it's much more brutal sounding than I realized I was, but it's very true. Do you feel like that, or?
Claire, we got questions to answer for you
well,
know.
Maggie's
Okay,
not
who
gonna
cares
answer
how I
that 'cause
feel?
it's too
Look at
hard.
all these people. Here, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, incredible.
Okay, I can be mic'd up. Thank you for being here. I had a question about your experience being a more experimental, playing with form, genre-bending author in the publishing industry. I was curious if you've ever felt pressure to become less experimental or rein in your book in some way for marketing or publishing purpose or consumability, consumer purposes. Or if you've maybe had the opposite experience, publishers and readers seem more ready for genre-bending work. So curious what your experience has been with that.
I don't think publishers in general are please be more experimental. I mean, that's not generally what they want.
Like the understatement of the evening.
Right. For me, formal play has always, when I have employed it, has always been really tightly united to the thing I was trying to say. And that when it has come about, it's in general been really actually kind of organic in the sense that a more traditional form didn't allow me to say the thing I wanted to say. And so in that way, I didn't care, because I wanted to say the thing I wanted to say, and I needed to say it correctly. I will also say that my dearest friend, who is here, is a conceptual artist and is very formally preoccupied. And so I think that that's been one of the biggest influences on me in terms of allowing myself to get weird with it. I mean, I think that, and allowing myself to say the thing the way it needed to be said, and allow myself to accept that form was going to be as important as, say, for instance, clarity, or as important as warmth or connection to the reader, or as important as a lot of other things that had been previously important to me, that form could do a lot of that work. And that was I think I developed that when I was writing Love and Trouble. I was always interested in form. In its way, Poser is preoccupied with form. But that more radical foregrounding of form was partly because of somebody who was making forms on a wall. And I was able to think about it in this more separate from me kind of way and think it through in a different way. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
think there was someone else on that row.
like
Yeah, maybe you could just pass it on down.
Thank you. Thank you both for such a great conversation. So interesting. I was wondering when you talked about like this obsession or of exploring like being good, what's a good person? I wondered what your definition of that was, or like who's good? Whose definition of good?
Yeah, I mean, that was the problem, right? Like, I didn't know. And so that's very much what, I think that every piece of personal writing starts out asking one question, or often, almost always. It starts out asking one question, and then the real question is revealed. That's kind of the plot of memoir. And I've done a lot of studying of this, and it sort of seems to always be true. And I think for me, my narrator often is asking, how do I become a good person? How do I make sure that I'm a good person? And then she's sort of left standing there going like, what is a good person? So certainly in the end, when she has kind of gone through whatever the process of the book is, she doesn't know. She might think she knows at the beginning of each of the books, right? So it's almost like an undoing of the idea of goodness. And I think that actually holds true for all three books. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. I wanted to ask, you're talking about ambition as an artist. And, like, I think of how inspiration comes to people and then, you work through it. But what is the thing that you think as an artist, you're trying to get to? Like, that the theme, the thread through all of your work, like, what needs to come out? And when is it ever enough? Or, because I know like something about returning to similar themes is something that a lot of artists do, and yeah. I don't know. I'm just curious about that sponge to squeeze.
Yeah, this kind of a recognition that this idea of goodness has animated my work is not something I set out with each book to do. It's something that's a retrospective realization. But I feel like this is more of a teacher answer than a creative person answer, but I think it's true for me. I think that one of the things that we are generally quite bad at, like I talk a lot in Monsters about trying to recognize what you love. And I think it's really important for artists to not worry so much about what they're supposed to love and really look at work they do love and allow themselves to be influenced by it. I think the same thing happens with interest. I think there's a weird kind of resistance to just doing what you're interested in. I see this a lot in my teaching, that students will have things they think they're supposed to write about, but they won't be writing the thing that they actually really are just thinking about all the time. So rather than thinking about what it is that's this theme that's going to emerge, what I try to train myself to do is to really notice what's interesting to me. Am I, whether that's I'm thinking about money all the time or, whatever it is that, however uncomfortable it might be. Right now I've been thinking every day I think about regret. Regret is very much on my mind, especially political regret in this moment. And finally I just allowed myself to write about it because it's really all I was thinking about. So that quality of noticing what's interesting and moving forward with that is how I think about developing the body of my work now. And that's what I would really encourage writers to do is, it kind of goes also to the idea of expertise. I think we have this idea that we're should we write on something that we're expert in? And the fact is that we're all experts on things like, right now your back hurts, you're an expert on backs. You know what I mean? It's just, we have these ways that we have these areas of expertise that we don't recognize because they're too close to us. So it's both understanding what you're interested in, also what's the stuff that's been filling your days. And allowing yourself just to look at that and know, there's always this balance in personal writing where it seems like it's both too much and not enough, your life. There's both this feeling of total overwhelm because, of course, your subjective experience is all you know and it has all the infinitude of a world. And then it's also not enough because who cares about, your dog? But I think that it's trusting that interest, trusting the stuff of your life is really actually kind of the hard work of it if you're going to have longevity. Yeah.
Maybe one final question, and then if anyone has one, I'll take.
Oh, yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Yeah, so, you wrote about monsters, and I mean, in this era where a lot of people feel like, it's, an era of monsters or whatever, where do you go looking for heroes or for the good or for the, I don't know, maybe the good expression?
The good expression. Say more about that.
Well, I don't know, people with visions of the future that are, being heroic. I don't know. I guess like the opposite of the monster.
Yeah, I'm really interested in action. That's what I'm interested in. I am really interested in what people, and I think a lot of people are feeling this way. I don't know, maybe I finished the book and I sort of say, how you consume art doesn't make you a good person or a bad person. You're going to have to figure out some other way to do that. And I've had especially young readers come up to me and say, well, how should I do that? And I'm like, and they say, how do you do that? And I'm like, well, that's not what the book is about. But I do think there's a way that the book is pointing toward action at the end. What is it you're going to do? And for me, that's what I want to see right now. I want to see people who are making stuff happen in a day, in a real life kind of way, politically. That's what I'm looking at. And I think it's what I need to see right now. I mean, I know that's a kind of banal answer in a way, but it's the truth. So it has that benefit of being true.
Okay, we're in 1 minute. We're going to give a rousing applause to thank Claire. But before we do that, wait, I just want to say that I've been told we have to empty this theater entirely before the book signing begins. So after we give Claire our love, you will all depart, and then you'll all get in line, and she will sign books in the lobby. So, okay, with that, thank you, Claire. Yay.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, everyone.